It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Tonight, we have, again, forget it, tonight's a blockbuster show. We have John Kiriakou, and he is a former CIA agent, and he's the author of The Reluctant Spy. And he pretty much just got out of prison for being like a whistleblower. So, John, are you there?
I sure am. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to have you on here, especially the little chat we had off the air. So give us an idea. Who is John Kiriakou, and what is your story?
Well, I joined the CIA in January of 1990 as an analyst working on the Middle East, and loved that job. Did it for 7.5 years, and then decided I was ready for something new, and I switched to operations, also within the CIA, and did that for another 7.5 years. So after the September 11th attacks, I became the chief of CIA counterterrorism operations in Pakistan, and in that capacity led a raid on the night of March 28, 2002, that turned out to be the biggest counterterrorism raid in CIA history, which still stands. We captured Abu Zubaydah, who we believed at the time was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda, and we caught 51 other Al-Qaeda fighters. I went home from Pakistan in late 2002 and was asked when I got home if I wanted to be certified in the use of what they called enhanced interrogation techniques. I called them torture techniques, and I declined to be trained. I left the CIA in 2004, went into the private sector for a while. Then I went to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I was the senior investigator for that committee, and I was the senior intelligence advisor to the chairman, John Kerry. But in 2007, I went on ABC News, and I said 3 things that really changed the course of my life. I said that the CIA was torturing its prisoners. I said that torture was official U.S. government policy. And I said that that policy had been approved and signed by the president. Now, the president, George W. Bush, had said earlier in the week, with his eyes right on the camera, he said, "We do not torture." And I said that the president is a liar. And so that resulted in a 4-year-long FBI investigation. I was finally charged with 5 felonies, including 3 counts of espionage for saying that we were torturing prisoners. Those espionage counts were dropped. I took a plea to a lesser charge. I did 23 months in a federal prison, not in a country club prison, but in a real, honest-to-God prison, and got out this February.
How old are you now?
I'm 51, just turned 51.
Wow, 51. Okay, that's not easy time going into 30 months in prison, 47 years old.
No, not easy time at all. And I'll tell you what, my only exposure to prison had been watching MSNBC at 11 o'clock at night. So I really didn't know what to expect. And I thought I was going to a minimum security work camp. That's what the judge had recommended. That's what the prosecutors had agreed to. In fact, the Bureau of Prisons does whatever it pleases, and so as soon as I arrived, they took me around to the back and put me in the actual prison rather than in the minimum security camp.
Yeah, sometimes when I'm watching Rachel Maddow, I feel like I'm in maximum security. I'm sorry.
I just can't watch those shows anymore.
Okay, so you just got out. Now, how old were you when you went into the CIA?
I was young. Let's see. I was 25 when I joined the CIA.
And what did you do before that?
I was in grad school. I got a bachelor's degree in Middle Eastern Studies, and I was working on a master's degree in legislative affairs when one of my professors, who liked my writing style, asked me to stay after class one day. And to make a long story short, it turned out he was actually undercover as a professor. He was working as what used to be called a CIA spotter, looking for grad students who would fit into the agency's culture. And so he recruited me into the CIA right out of graduate school.
You know, there must be a lot of that, because I know I've had a lot of CIA guys on the show, and I believe I've heard that story before, that they were recruited by a professor.
Yeah, it actually used to be quite common. It really, until 1992 or 93, with the passage of the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, it was pretty much the only real way to get into the CIA. You had to be noticed. You had to be spotted. I mean, it's like being at the soda fountain at whatever that famous drugstore was in Hollywood, if you wanted to be an actor. So, there used to be senior CIA officers undercover at important universities all around the country. And I just, was lucky enough to have one as my grad school advisor.
Now, but you had no plans, even though you were taking these foreign languages, you had no plans to go into the CIA or something like that?
No, I was thinking that I would probably end up on Capitol Hill or maybe take the Foreign Service exam. I knew I wanted to work in foreign affairs doing something, but I hadn't really given the CIA any thought until they approached me. Okay,
gotcha. Now you said at first you were an analyst or something like that?
Yeah, I was for the first half of my career. And the analytic jobs at the CIA are a lot of fun, especially if you're an introvert, because you're going to sit in your cubicle 9 or 10 hours a day and think the big thoughts and write important papers and send those papers to the White House and hope that the president reads them and comments on them. But, after doing that year in, year out, working on Iraq, year after year after year, it wears you down. And I thought, boy, I'm 30 years old. There's got to be more to life than this. So I decided, I spoke Arabic, I spoke Greek, and it was time for something exciting. And so on the strength of those two languages, I was able to switch over to counterterrorism operations.
And this is around 30 years old now, so you must have been in pretty good shape, right?
Yeah, I was in pretty good shape. I wasn't former military, but I was thin and young and strong and happy to jump out of the plane and be trained in everything else. And, the friends of mine were like, are you sure you want to do this? This is going to be rough. This is going to be like being in the military, at least through training. And I said, yeah, I know. Yeah, I can tough it out for whatever it was, 6 or 8 months at the time. And I ended up doing very well, and I enjoyed it very much.
And because the operations you were doing as part of the CIA were actually military combat operations, right?
Well, no.
Okay.
They became military or paramilitary combat operations after September 11th. Before September 11th, it was, much more old school. It was much more sophisticated, where we have something called the asset recruitment cycle. It's every officer has to spot, assess, develop, and recruit an agent in order to get promoted, right? You have to recruit spies to steal secrets. And you spot these people, depending on what your target is or what kind of job you're doing, at diplomatic cocktail parties or wherever. I mean, any number of different scenarios. After September 11th, it really did change to paramilitary operations where, you're wearing whatever special forces wear and you parachute into something and you shoot the place up and you grab the bad guy. But before September 11th, that's really not what the CIA was.
Before, it sounds more like Amway, or like you're recruiting people to come in underneath you.
But, pretty much it was the same idea. Now, you have to establish a relationship with somebody, with your target.
Right.
You have to establish a rapport to the point where you become so close to that person, or at least that person thinks that you're close, to the point where he's going to commit espionage for you. He's going to commit treason for you because he likes you. I mean, there's certainly other motivators, money, revenge, ideology, but the real basis of the relationship is friendship.
Wow. It's almost like you're a con man or a cult.
I've said years in interviews that those of us who were in operations or are in operations right now, you're trained to lie, and you lie every day, and you lie all day, and you live a lie. You just have to know when to turn it off at the end of the day. A lot of guys can't.
Yeah.
And so, the CIA has a sky-high divorce rate. But you are very well trained as a professional liar.
Okay, fascinating. Okay, so now, and you said that you went to Afghanistan and you captured this guy. Who was this guy you captured?
In Pakistan, this was Abu Zubaydah. We thought at the time that he was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda.
Okay.
In fact, he had never actually joined Al-Qaeda, but his job was to provide Al-Qaeda's logistical support, logistical leadership. He created Al-Qaeda's 2 training camps in southern Afghanistan. If you needed a false passport or you needed a plane ticket, Abu Zubaydah was the guy. If you needed a safe house or a way to get from point A to point B across the border, you went to Abu Zubaydah. So although he had never formally joined Al-Qaeda, he had never pledged fealty to Osama bin Laden, he was Al-Qaeda's go-to guy for logistics.
So, okay, that's interesting. So now, but you hear these stories over here in the United States that they're hanging out in caves and stuff like that.
Yeah, not true.
Okay, then give us.
I don't know how that rumor ever got started that they were living in caves. The whole cave story never made sense to me because, I mean, these guys are just like everybody else. You can rough it for only so long. You know, people used to ask me, "Where do you think Bin Laden is?" And I used to say, "I think Bin Laden is comfortable in a house in a major city somewhere." And I'll tell you why. Because these guys always thought that we thought that they were hiding in the tribal areas because we can't get to the tribal areas except with the use of drones. In fact, we knew that they were all in major cities. And it was this reverse psychology. So when they're in the cities, thinking that we're looking for them in the countryside, they tend to be a little bit more sloppy, especially with their electronic communications, cell phones, email, stuff like that. And then they're easier to catch when they're in the city. I mean, we caught Abu Zubaydah in a major city. We caught Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in a major city. He was the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. We caught Abdurrahim al-Nashidi in a major city. He was the mastermind of the Cole bombing. We caught Ramzi bin Ashib in a major city. And then, of course, you know, bin Laden was in the Pakistani version of West Point in a major city.
Yeah, right. Now, what do you make of that? You know, because you'd think that these guys would be on our side, right, or on your side, or, you know, on the CIA side.
Well,
yeah.
You know, I always said that the Pakistani Intelligence Service, ISI, was really 2 separate organizations. The guys that I was working with were just fantastic. I mean, they were all trained in the UK. They all went through Sandhurst and British police training. And they were really great. They were great counterterrorism partners. But ISI is also the same organization that created the Taliban. You know, when Benazir Bhutto was the prime minister of Pakistan, she created the Taliban. See, Taliban is a word in both Arabic and in Urdu that means students. The singular is talib and the plural is Taliban, which means students. And these students were studying in madrasas, in private Islamic schools in Pakistan, and they were Afghan nationals. So the Pakistanis were running trucks across Afghanistan to Iran so that they could sell their goods in Iran, and the trucks were being hijacked as they were crossing Pakistan. So Benazir Bhutto got this group of students together and said, I want you to ride along in the trucks, you know, with weapons, and if anybody tries to hijack the trucks, fight them off. So as these trucks would cross Afghanistan, the Taliban were able to secure individual villages along the route, and that's how they ended up taking over Pakistan. So Benazir Bhutto and ISI created the Taliban, they trained the Taliban, they financed the Taliban, they armed the Taliban. And at the same time, other ISI officers are working with us to fight the Taliban. So there was this disconnect within the Pakistani intelligence service. You could trust some of them, you couldn't trust others. You just had to play your cards well.
Okay. Now, I recall, I forget who was president at the time, but I recall that the Taliban coming to the United States, and it was like a big press conference, and it was revealed that their lobbyist was the daughter of one of the CIA directors. Are you familiar with that story?
Yeah, I do remember that story. And I recall she was based in New Jersey, I think it was.
Do you remember which CIA director that was?
Yeah, I don't. But I recall it being sort of a non-controversial issue at the time because we never had any beef with the Taliban historically. Now, some of those members of the Taliban, especially the older ones, were jihadis from the war against the Soviets, and of course we financed them, we trained them, we armed them, we gave them Stinger missiles. And every year or two, they would come to the United States. They would meet with President Reagan. They would be feted in Washington, and they'd go back to Afghanistan. So we had this relationship with at least some of these people. And until bin Laden went to Afghanistan, we sort of saw the Taliban as not our fight. If they were going to trample women's rights, well, we had no national interest there. It was none of our business. It wasn't until they provided safe haven for bin Laden that we decided this was going to be a problem.
What do you make of bin Laden? Okay, there's some people say that outright that he was CIA, and they had, I think his name was Osman or something like that, Ben Osman. They had another name,
Yeah.
And that, and then you got all this stuff about how his brother is connected up with the Carlyle group and was actually meeting with Bush the day of 9/11.
Oh, sure, but that's not scandalous. That's not unusual. First of all, bin Laden was never trained by the CIA. He was never a CIA source. He was never armed by the CIA. He didn't actually go to Afghanistan from Saudi Arabia until after the CIA stopped funding and training the Afghan Mujahideen. So that's kind of a common misnomer. A lot of people think that the CIA trained bin Laden or created bin Laden. That's just not true. You're talking about the extended bin Laden family. The bin Laden family is a very honorable family in Saudi Arabia. They're incredibly wealthy, 10-figure kind of wealthy, because the old man, Abdurrahman bin Laden, who originally moved to Saudi Arabia from Yemen, created what became the kingdom's largest construction firm, and his firm would do the biggest projects. They would build airports and hospitals and ports and shopping malls and stuff like that. So the old man insisted that most, if not all, of his children be educated in the West. They traveled to the United States all the time. They owned property in Beverly Hills and in Miami Beach, and they're very Americanized. It's just that one son, Osama, was, for whatever reason, radicalized. And instead of going into the family business, along with his 113 other brothers, he went to Afghanistan to make jihad.
And what do you make of people who say, well, he died prior to the story that we hear in the news about him dying?
Yeah, that's just nonsense.
Okay.
I mean, we would get these reports at the CIA all the time that bin Laden had kidney failure, he was on dialysis inside a cave, he had some kind of spinal disorder. We were always getting these medical rumors reported back to us, and none of them ended up to be true. But no, he was in perfectly fine health except for some arthritis. He had an ongoing hip problem, but he was healthy enough to wage war against the United States until the day he died.
Okay. Oh boy. Oh, okay. I almost forgot. Okay, slipped my mind for a second. What do you make of these stories about the Navy SEALs? Who are part of that operation? Now, all of a sudden, they're all dead in helicopter crashes and stuff.
Right. That's actually not uncommon. Being a Navy SEAL is one of the most dangerous professions in the world. And we're not talking specifically about the Navy SEALs who were directly involved in the bin Laden takedown being killed. We're talking about Navy SEALs from their broader unit. So we're talking about, 100, 120, 150 SEALs. So for a number of SEALs, a high number of SEALs to be killed, whether it's in accidents or in combat, is actually very sadly common.
Okay, so you're saying that when we hear these stories about how the Navy SEALs who killed bin Laden, now most of them are dead, you're saying it's not the actual same guys, it's just the guys in the same unit?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's not the same guys.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, let me interrupt you. When people talk about SEAL Team 6, or you see SEAL Team 6 in movies, you imagine a dozen or dozen and a half guys that make up SEAL Team 6. In fact, it's several hundred guys that make up SEAL Team 6. And it's, from those several hundred that we find these individuals who have been killed in accidents or killed in combat.
Now, what about the stories about the funeral, like this ocean funeral, and then even some congressmen who saw pictures and stuff like that said it looked like it was fake, and then even the White House had to kind of step back on some of the official story around that. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I don't know what to believe. I think he probably was buried at sea the way they say he was buried at sea. Maybe some of the details are wrong, because God knows the White House's story changes constantly every time this comes up. But I just don't see any conspiracy related to it. I see a bunch of people talking out of school and pretending to know the details of what happened, when in fact they don't really know the details. And I think that's why the story tends to change. But I do think that bin Laden was killed in whatever it was, May of 2011. I think he really was buried at sea. And I'm just not sure that the details are really that important.
Now, how about when you were in CIA? Were you ever involved in promoting false stories and planting?
No, there is such a thing as a false flag operation. False flag operations are very, very difficult, and there are a lot of moving parts, and you have to have a lot of people that buy into the conspiracy. But we really didn't use those very often because they were so complicated. It wasn't until just recently, where people have started to email me or Facebook me or contact me on Twitter about false flag operations. And I even have one friend who just thinks that every event in life is a false flag operation. And it just seems so preposterous to me because they are so labor intensive and so difficult to carry out. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I sympathize with you. I get those emails too.
They mean well. They really do, but
I know. And you kind of can't blame some people for being
reality.
paranoid. You can't blame people for being paranoid.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
When you have a government that's not transparent,
right?
When you have a government that pretends to tell the American people the whole story related to these terrorist operations, and then the story changes, you can't blame people for being suspicious of the government line.
Right. And you say now we have a government that tortures people. And says
exactly.
It's okay. Yeah.
And that denied it and denied it and denied it. I said this the other day in an op-ed that I wrote. Everything that the government has told us about torture since 2002 has been a lie. So why would you believe them now? George W. Bush said in 2002, we don't torture. And he said it again in 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. The week that I went on ABC News, he looked right in the camera and he said, we do not torture. And I remember saying to my wife, that is a bald-faced lie. He's just lying to the American people. And George Tenet said the same thing in 2005 on 60 Minutes. He came off in that segment like he was unhinged. He was practically shouting it, we don't torture, we don't torture, we don't torture. Well, of course we torture. And what makes it worse is not only are there U.S. laws that prohibit torture, but there are international treaties and conventions that the U.S. is a signatory to, and in some cases that the U.S. wrote and bullied other countries into signing, and then we violate those international treaties and conventions by torturing. Let me tell you another thing. In January of 1968, the Washington Post ran a front-page photograph of an American soldier waterboarding a North Vietnamese prisoner. When that photo was published, the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, ordered an investigation. The soldier was arrested, and he was charged with torture, and he was convicted and sent to prison. So why was torture illegal in 1968, but it wasn't illegal in 2002? Because the law didn't change. There was no amendment to the law banning torture saying, well, okay, now it's okay. There was no law that said, well, waterboarding's not torture, cold cell's not torture, sleep deprivation's not torture. The law didn't change. But we just had a group of attorneys in the Justice Department who decided that they were going to twist the law to do what they wanted. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, this is really, you and I are the same age, this is such a disturbing that even that we're even talking about this, and that people are excusing it, and it's really shattering.
It is. It is. I consider myself to be a patriot, and not just a patriot, but a patriot who spent 20 years serving my country in some of the most awful and dangerous places on earth. And I know that my country is better than this. My country shouldn't be waterboarding people or forcing hummus up their rectums or murdering them in the middle of interrogations, or, to make matters worse, droning American citizens overseas who have not been charged with a crime, who have not had the right to meet their accusers in court. That's not the America that I know and love. I don't know where this came from.
Okay, well, then coming from where you are right now today and just having served 30 months, I believe, right? 30 months?
Yes.
Do you still consider yourself a patriot? Do you still support the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War? Do you still, where are you now?
Well, I am a patriot. I never supported the Iraq War, though. I never thought that was a just war, and I even spent a good amount of space in my first book about it. That was a war of choice. That was a war of revenge for the Bush family. But yeah, I always supported the Afghan War. I don't anymore because the whole point of the Afghan War was to defeat Al Qaeda, and we defeated Al Qaeda by the middle of 2003. So the rest of it, since 2003, this has been nation building, which is never a good idea. But yeah, I'm still a patriot, and I want my September 10th country back.
And what about the overthrow in
ruined by George W. Bush and by Barack Obama equally.
What about the overthrow in Libya?
See, this is another thing. Gaddafi was a very bad guy, but we actually had a very healthy working relationship with Gaddafi, and Gaddafi hated Al Qaeda as much as we did. So flipping sides at the last minute like we did to overthrow Gaddafi was a terrible policy error. I mean, look at the place now. It's literally anarchy. It's chaos.
Right. Well, you say it's a policy area, but according to Wesley Clark, he says that's the plan all along, is to cause destabilization, to cause chaos.
See, this is the thing.
Yeah.
And Wes Clark, Wes Clark was a 4-star general. He ought to know what he's talking about. So if that's the policy, I think that's an incredibly short-sighted policy, because invariably where there's a power vacuum, we get dragged in. And when we get dragged into something like this, like we did in Lebanon, for example, in the 1980s, we can't get ourselves back out again.
Do you think there's a motive to get us back out when these companies like Halliburton are making all this money on laundry and it's unbelievable the kind of money they're making over there?
That's a really important point. I never believed that until, I'm going to say, the last 4 or 5 years. And I've come to the conclusion that we need, economically, we need for war to be a permanent thing.
Yeah.
And already the American people are sort of numb to the idea of war, in part because we have an all-volunteer military. And I think that's why we're not seeing demonstrations in the streets. I mean, already Afghanistan, it's the longest war in American history. It's twice as long, it's more than, well, now it's 3 times as long as World War II was. And, nobody's really upset about this.
So now, John, where did the torturing get started? Was this at Guantanamo? Was this in Abu Ghraib? Where did you first?
It was before Abu Ghraib, and actually before Guantanamo. Abu Zubaydah was the first high-level Al Qaeda-related prisoner that we had captured, and so, at the time, and when I say at the time, I mean immediately after the September 11th attacks, Osama bin Laden released a statement in which he said that Al Qaeda was planning another attack that would dwarf September 11th. And we were panicked at the thought, because September 11th was a disaster. It was an intelligence failure. It was just an across-the-board, American failure. So we were worried about this what they call the ticking time bomb scenario. And so CIA's leadership believed that Abu Zubaydah had information related to whatever this upcoming attack was or was going to be. In fact, there was no upcoming attack. He just said it to panic us, and he succeeded. So a decision was made at CIA headquarters that we were going to come up with these torture techniques. It was a list of something like 10 different torture techniques. And they sent this list to the Justice Department, which approved it, and then it went to the lawyers at the National Security Council. They approved it. From there, it went to the National Security Advisor, she was Condoleezza Rice at the time. She approved it and sent it to the president. Well, nobody in the CIA's leadership thought the president was going to approve this because it was clearly torture. And sure enough, he approved it. And I remember sitting in a meeting with the deputy director of the CIA the day after the signed memo came into headquarters, and the deputy director said something like 3 times during the course of our conversation, "I can't believe the president signed that memo. I can't believe it." And that's how the torture regime started. Guantanamo, I mean, we really didn't even, how should I say this? Guantanamo was supposed to be a temporary stop. See, we were capturing people so quickly, and we were capturing so many of them, especially after the fall of Tora Bora in October 2001, that we needed someplace to just park them long enough for us to put all the paperwork together and then send them to the United States to stand trial, because September 11th was still an ongoing, open criminal investigation. Guantanamo was never supposed to be permanent. They were supposed to stay there only long enough for us to then send them onward to the States for trial. And, of course, nobody ever went on trial, and here we are 14 years later, and we're still talking about whether or not we should close Guantanamo.
You know, my next guest tonight, Michael Bowe, the attorney, and the story is about how the Marines turned a blind eye to child sex abuse. Did you ever run across any of that over there?
Yeah, in Afghanistan, you actually run into it with some regularity. It's this weird thing in Afghan culture that if a boy does not yet have whiskers, if he hasn't yet reached puberty, you can have sex with him. It's specific to Sunni Muslims, and that's why a lot of Taliban would rape young boys. It's just this weird, perverted cultural thing that they have.
What about the stories we heard of young boys being raped at Abu Ghraib in front of their parents as part of interrogation?
To the best of my understanding, that didn't happen, although, I mean, it's almost as bad. It's my understanding that some of our soldiers threatened prisoners with that if you don't talk, we're going to rape your children. If you don't talk, we're going to rape your wife. Or we're going to rape your children in front of your wife. We'll rape your wife in front of you, that kind of thing. Now, that's also a violation of law, both U.S. law and the United Nations Convention on Torture. But we actually did that kind of thing in Abu Ghraib. At least threatened it, I mean.
Well, if you look at some of the pictures that came out of Abu Ghraib, have you been to Abu Ghraib? What do you know firsthand? No. No,
I've not been to Abu Ghraib.
Okay. But you've seen some of those pictures that came out of there.
Oh, yeah.
They got
horrific.
Naked guys in a pyramid. It's way beyond...
naked guys with electrical wires attached to their scrotums.
Right.
We did horrible things to people over there.
So whatever
horrible
was going...
things that aren't appropriate in any circumstance, whether in war or peace.
Or even effective to get confessions out of people.
And really, that's the most important point. They're not effective in any way in getting confessions or in getting any kind of intelligence. We know now from both the Senate Torture Report and the CIA Inspector General's report that was released in the spring of 2009 that torture never worked, that CIA interrogators never gathered any actionable intelligence, and that no American lives were saved. And let me add one more thing about that, too. You hear a lot of people now saying, well, it was just the Senate Intelligence Committee Democrats that signed on to that report. Let me remind those naysayers that the Senate Democrats and the Senate Intelligence Committee investigators used primary source documents, that is, original CIA intelligence cables from the field to write that report. So there is no rebuttal. There is no excuse. Torture didn't work. It never works. It didn't save any American lives.
Did you watch the hearings yesterday?
I did.
Okay, so did I, the whole thing, all day long. Now what do you make of that? It seems to me that something more was going on down there with the CIA compound across from this, you've heard the rumors, right, about gun running and these kind of things. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think there's actually some evidence of gun running.
And
this whole idea of gun running has been a problem really since the very beginning of the uprising against Gaddafi. Already Libya is kind of a no man's land because its borders aren't clearly defined. The desert is constantly shifting. Libya is an intensely tribally based society, so you can't really, people in Libya never really trust their central government, and then you've got vast numbers of weapons changing hands. So, who's involved? I'm not sure we're ever going to really get to the bottom of that story. Was the CIA involved? Were the British involved? Were the Egyptians involved? I don't think we'll ever really know.
And it doesn't seem like that these hearings are even trying to find out.
Yeah, there are so many legitimate issues that we could be talking about related to Benghazi or Libya more broadly. And instead it just devolved into this political thing between Hillary Clinton and the Republicans on the committee. I don't think anybody did the American people any service by allowing this to become political, when there are some very important intelligence issues at play here. And, I saw a thing on the news the other day saying that in the years that George W. Bush was president, something like 60 attacks. There were 60 attacks around the world against American embassies and consulates, including, I forget what, half a dozen or a dozen deaths. And we've never investigated any of those. Maybe we should. Maybe we should investigate every time there's an attack on an American embassy or consulate, or any time American personnel overseas are killed. It shouldn't be political. It shouldn't be partisan. It should be something we're doing so that we can improve the protection of our own facilities and our own people.
Yeah, there were half a dozen embassy attacks that weekend. It was demonstrations,
exactly.
But they breached
all
the
over
walls.
The region.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, why aren't we investigating that?
Well, good question. It's a circus. That's why I look at Donald Trump. We got let's get into all of that. It's a circus over there right now, man.
That's right.
I wish it would torture me. I wish I can't take any more of this. What do you make of, we just had this thing in the news just in the past week where this guy, this Fox News commentator was claiming to be a CIA. What's going on with that, man?
It's funny to me. I have run into so many people over the years who claim to be agency.
Right.
And you can spot them from a mile away because they get the lingo wrong. I interviewed a guy one time. I was working in the private sector after I left the CIA, and I was working in competitive intelligence, business intelligence. And so this guy applied for a job, and on his resume he said he was a CIA officer. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna take this guy to lunch, and maybe we have some friends in common. I'll see if he's any good. So I took him to lunch, and I said to him, listen, I said, it's not clear from your resume whether you were from the Directorate of Operations or the Directorate of Intelligence. So where did you work? And he said, oh, both. I was both. And I said, well, that's kind of impossible. You have to be from one or the other. Oh, he says, I was operations. I said, oh, okay. So where did you work? He said, oh, I was counterterrorism. I said, well, that's great. I was counterterrorism. What division were you in? And he just looked at me with this blank
that was in the blue
stare.
one.
And I said, you made all this up, didn't you? And he's like, oh, I'm really sorry. I really need this job. And I said, okay, thanks. Nice meeting you. And that was the end of it. So this guy on Fox News, he said he was something like outside paramilitary special operations. Well, those are just meaningless words. There is no such position as outside paramilitary special operations. I mean, it sounds like very intriguing, and it's all these buzzwords, but it doesn't mean anything. There is no such position. And so, the first time I heard this guy say, I thought, absolutely no way he's CIA. He may have been a contractor. He may have been inflating what he did, but there's no way this guy was CIA. And then sure enough, he wasn't.
Okay, but now, first, how do you get away with that?
It's
why
like
doesn't the CIA
does
step in right away and say
anymore.
this guy's not the real deal?
Yeah, he's not the real deal. The real shame about this whole thing is that apparently this son of a gun was able to trick people at DOD into giving him a security clearance.
Yeah.
Just because he told them he had been CIA. This guy went overseas to Afghanistan to advise our generals on strategy because he said he was from the CIA. Well, I can tell you, any CIA officer I've ever worked with could peg this guy in 5 seconds and say, this guy's making the whole thing up.
Well, okay, we spend a lot of money to support the CIA, right?
Yeah.
Do they have
right?
TV sets? Do they have cable news? Couldn't they turn on their TV over there and see this guy on TV and say, hey, does anybody know this guy?
Yeah, and we all do that,
yeah.
right? Like every once in a while, if I'm flipping through Fox News, I'll see somebody I won't even say his name, but I'll see somebody I served with, and I'm like, oh, hey, he ended up on Fox News. Good for him. Or I saw a former boss of mine on CNBC, and I was like, oh, hey, there's Mike. He's on CNBC. Good for Mike. But this guy, you would think that somebody would say, geez, I'm paramilitary at CIA. I never saw this guy before.
Or even active duty right now, CIA. They must be checking to see what information's slipping out through Fox News or through the news.
You would
on
think.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would think. I would have. You're exactly right. I would have expected somebody at the CIA to call Fox News and say, hey, this guy's an imposter.
And especially when we know for a fact that the intelligence departments have a lot of control over what goes on in the media and the news and in movies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I got some guys here. I'm working with Pierce Redmond and Tom Secker. They get the FOIA records of how the military and the Defense Department is so involved in the movie industry. It's into such detail you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, it's embarrassing even.
Yeah. So now how did this guy get away with this for so long?
I don't know. I hope that this is an anomaly.
No, it's not.
I hope that somehow, for whatever reason, this guy slipped through the cracks. I will add, though, that his message on Fox News was always solidly pro-CIA, solidly pro-DOD, and I wonder if people at the CIA did know that he was an imposter, but figured, well, he's saying all the right things, so we're not going to object.
Okay, yeah, because in my business, I run into a lot of these guys who make these kind of claims. In my business as a PI and also as a radio host, I run into these crackpots all day long. Some of them are radio hosts, and I don't understand how they're getting away with this.
I worked with a guy in the private sector who I never met anybody who so desperately wanted to be a CIA officer as this guy, and so he finally got himself in as a contractor, and I said to him, so what are you doing over there anyway? And he says, it's pretty hush-hush, but it's special intel ops support, special weapons and tactics. And I'm like, dude, you make yourself sound like a fool, because none of those words mean anything. And you get that a lot, especially in Washington. It's pretty sad.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, people, they try and talk this lingo, but, it's just boots on the ground,
Exactly. All the buzzwords and the catchphrases.
Oh, man. Listen, we're down to like the last 9 minutes, What do you want to leave us with? Give us some advice here.
Well, one thing that I'm really upset about since September 11th, and this is something that I write about a lot and I take very seriously, and it's the loss of our civil liberties, the civil liberties of individual Americans in the name of national security. When I first joined the CIA, we had several rules that were written in stone, and that was that the CIA did not spy on Americans, and that the NSA did not spy on Americans. And if, for example, if the NSA had accidentally stumbled onto an American, who had accidentally intercepted a telephone call, every trace of that interception had to be purged from NSA's records, and then NSA had to inform Congress, oh my God, we've accidentally intercepted the phone call or the email of an American citizen. Well, now, NSA's primary targets are American citizens. NSA just built a new facility in the desert in Utah that has enough storage space to save every phone call, every text message, and every email from every American for the next 500 years. We have the CIA droning American citizens overseas, as I said earlier, who have never been charged with a crime, who have never been able to face their accusers in a court of law. And there just doesn't seem to be any outrage over this. If the government can kill an American citizen overseas, then can the government kill an American citizen, on his ranch in Idaho? We don't know. And the Attorney General of the United States, at least the previous one, Eric Holder, wouldn't even answer that question when asked it by Senator Rand Paul. So I'm just seeing a real devolution in our civil liberties, and I think it's a very dangerous trend.
Yeah, and the government, whether or not they're killing people, off the street, they definitely are throwing people in prison off the street.
Yeah, they sure are.
I mean, you can testify firsthand. And I got to tell you, a good number of my guests on this show have been to prison, and it just seems to be a recurring. I got former guests that are in prison right now, for nonsense. Again, liberty kind of stuff,
Yeah. Yeah, good grief. I'll tell you, I was charged under the Espionage Act because I had a conversation with a reporter from the New York Times, and I said that we were torturing prisoners. So that bought me 3 espionage counts. The Espionage Act was written in 1917 to target German saboteurs during the First World War. Between 1917 and 2009, it was used 3 times. But since Barack Obama became president, it's been used 9 times against Americans. Now, none of us have been accused of passing information to a foreign government, to an enemy. These were all for information that went to the press. And for several of us, and I'm thinking about myself and Tom Drake, for example, from NSA, and Jeffrey Sterling from CIA, it was after we had either reported through the chain of command or gone public with evidence of waste, fraud, abuse, illegality, or threat to public health or safety. That's the definition of whistleblowing. So here we are near the end of Barack Obama's second term, and I can safely say, I think, that Barack Obama is going to go down in history as the enemy of transparency, as the enemy of whistleblowing and of transparent government. And that's exactly what he said he would not do when elected president.
Okay, that's a good question. What do you make of Barack Obama? Because a lot of people I've had on this show that have met him, like Cynthia McKinney and Cindy Sheehan and others, including a former State Department guy who's a K Street lobbyist right now, okay? And when I asked them this question, because obviously his paperwork and his background is suspect. He doesn't have the right paperwork. Do you make him to be a CIA creation?
I've been very public with my opinion on this, and I'll tell you what I think has happened. You had a very junior senator, a very junior first-term senator, who had no exposure to national security, no experience in national security at all. That's exactly the kind of young new president the CIA wants, because as soon as that new president sees his first blue border report, or black border report, something that's so many levels above top secret they can't even keep track. As soon as he's brought into his first super secret operation, they have him hooked. And they've essentially recruited him. And I think that is exactly what happened to Barack Obama. He campaigned as an outsider. He campaigned on the idea of clean government and transparency. And as soon as they brought him into the club, they had him. There was a book that came out in 2014 by Halpern and Heilman, two reporters, Time Magazine and MSNBC. They had done a book rather on the 2008 election, and then they did a follow-up book on the 2012 election. And there were two quotes from Barack Obama in that second book that were really chilling. And Obama had agreed to an interview for the book, so these came right from the horse's mouth. First, he said, "I never told anybody I was a liberal." And I thought that was just fascinating. The second quote was, "I never had any idea I would be so good at killing people." And with that, he was talking about the drone program. And that tells me that that's not how he went into his presidency. It's how he changed once he became president.
It's very interesting. But I had a guest on here that discussed some of his previous employment. And he described it as a classic CIA front operation.
Yeah, but the CIA doesn't do stuff like that. I mean, that's the stuff of movies and fiction books. That's just not how it works.
Okay. And the history with his parents and stuff like that, and their travels and associations with communists and all that, you don't see anything suspect with that either?
No, I don't. I mean, you're talking about a plot that would have begun with his birth. I mean, I don't know anybody that's that smart or that's that good to be able to carry out this conspiracy from the guy's birth all the way to the presidency, like a Manchurian candidate.
Gotcha. Okay, I really want to have you back to discuss the whole story of Abu Ghraib, and all that kind of stuff. Just specifically to get into all the details on that, just 100% specifically. But once again, what's your website?
Oh, thanks. My website is www.johnkiriakou.com. It's John, John. Kiriakou is KIRIAKOU.com.
And we got the book Reluctant Spy, My Secret Life in the CIA's War on Terror. But you got a couple other books you're working on too as well?
Yeah, I've got two books completed that are out for bid right now. One is called Letters from Loretto, which is based on a series of blogs that I wrote from prison. And the second one, or it's the third one, I guess, it's more fun. It's called Doing Time Like a Spy, How the CIA Taught Me to Survive and Thrive in Prison.
Okay, listen, you got to promise me you're going to come back, all right?
I'd love to. Thanks for having me.
Okay, man, that's good stuff. We got to get into that. Thank you so much for coming on, my friend.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Good night.
Bye-bye.